What did that one teacher do to you that you'll never forget? I faked my way through 4th and 5th grade math. I never understood how to do long division, but managed to hide that from the teachers and answer test questions by reverse multiplication. Basically guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. My 6th grade math teacher figured out that I was faking and had no idea how to actually divide anything. She had me come in one afternoon to help with cleaning the erasers. All the kids fought for this privilege, so I was thrilled. Sat me down and tutored me until I grasped the concept. Bless you, Mrs. Gillespie. Basically guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. That's not faking, you discovered binary search lol. At my high school, we had an annual week-long science trip, fully paid for by fundraising. Only 4 people were selected to go each year. My sophomore year, I was chosen. I knew there was no way I was going to be allowed to go. I had never been out of the state, never been on a single vacation, never been on a plane, and never been away from home for more than 24 hours. My parents were incredibly conservative and immediately said no. I had a science teacher who just didn't accept the no. Instead of just giving up and selecting someone else, he called and tried to convince my parents. When that didn't work, he came to my house and had dinner with my family to convince my dad that I would be an asset and he would be doing me a disservice by not letting me go. He sat and ate my mom's terrible cooking and talked to my parents for over 2 hours until he got a real think about it. Then he just kept following up. I had never had someone in my corner like that before, who was willing to go to bat for me like that. He wore them down, and it was the best week of my teenage life. I'd never seen the ocean. 20 years later, and I can still recall every detail of that trip. It was a major pivot point for me. My physics teacher in high school hosted an annual trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando for 15 to 20 kids for over a week. I was one of the better and most interested students in his class. He was an incredible teacher who found examples in physics everywhere. He also used to work for Disney prior to teaching. Since my family was not so well off and I could not afford the trip to Walt Disney World, I declined when he asked me if I was going to join. He probed a bit and he somehow found the funds to have me join without me even inquiring. I don't know if he pulled school money or there was a surplus, but either way, that was one of my best memories from that school. I still keep in touch with him 15 years later. In high school, one of my teachers had this duckbill whistle, literally shaped like a duck's bill, and it made a quacking noise. She used it to get the class attention. One time I guess we were being extra rowdy and she blew the ever-living shit out of it, and the class went stone dead quiet. She got this shocked look on her face, and then took her hairpin out and dropped it, and the whole class heard it hit the ground, and she got this big grin on her face and we all just busted out laughing. My band teacher drove me home several times after the 7 PM jazz band practice. My dad was supposed to pick me up, but several times he fell asleep and didn't answer the phone when I tried to call. Reminds me of my family. I'm the youngest, so literally everyone else can drive, and there was always at least one car, but they never showed up on time. There was this one band concert when I was a freshman where literally every other kid had gotten picked up, but I was still stuck sitting there for an hour. At the time I thought my band teacher was mad at me, but looking back she just seemed so sad. She waited with me the whole time. I can't forget the way she said, "Well, I can't just leave you here." The professor I had for my Calculus 100 class in university was awesome. He was a good teacher and funny and engaging. If it was a first year class with over 100 people in it, I was just a face in a big crowd. I was on campus after hours a couple years after I graduated. They run programs for kids in the evenings, and was dropping off my oldest, and I saw him. He stopped, looked at me hard, and said, "Not a bad student. Not great, but definitely not bad," and kept walking. This was a good 6 years after I graduated. Absolutely amazed he would have remembered me at all after teaching how many hundreds of students in between. That is just crazy. 3rd grade MRS Jones. My dad had just deserted us and we were suddenly destitute. She bought my school pictures for us and paid my lunch bill all year. She never said a word about it. Only found out later. Bless her. In 5th grade I had this teacher who was very gruff. Most of us didn't like her because she was such a hard ass. Like military style with discipline and homework completion. She wasn't mean. But she wasn't nice either. Then I found out my parents were getting a divorce. I showed up to school one day visibly upset, kinda shaky, and had obviously been crying. She basically grunt rasped decidedly undecided. Hallway. Now, I was so not in the mood to be scolded, and I knew I was a mess. I stomped out into the hallway. She told me she knew what was happening at home. Asked me if I was okay, then listened to me sob and break down about how I felt. She gave me a hug and asked if I wanted to spend an hour or so in the library, since she knew I loved books, and then I could ground myself. It was so unexpectedly kind. I will never forget it. I found out later she was so gruff and short with us because she'd been teaching for a long ass time and kids are mean. She had some sort of health condition that left her in pain most of the time, and she had to use a cane which caused her to hunch a bit. Over the years all the meanness of the kids made her a little hard and cold, but she really did care about her students. Told me I was smart and could succeed. I had spent the past couple years at a private school, trying so hard to prove myself. Despite doing well academically, I didn't fit their cookie cutter mold. So I was looked down on by other students and administration. When I told the guidance counselor that I wanted to be pre-med and go to medical school after college, she pretty much told to lower my expectations because I wouldn't succeed. At the end of my college math class my senior year of high school, I ended up in my professor's office to look at what I had missed on my final. He told me that I had done well and that I could my PhD in math if I wanted. That was not what I wanted to do. But when I told him I wanted to be pre-med, he looked at me and said, "You're going to well and that. I know you will succeed." 6 years later, and I'm halfway through my second year of medical school, and his words still ring in my mind. She outed me for pretending to not speak English to my mom. I'm Mexican American, but I'm one of those lame border crossed me ones who was really a Native American, if we are being honest. At any rate, I ignored my kindergarten teacher so much she assumed I didn't speak English. I had skipped state testing because I had been to 6 to 7 elementary schools as my mom was skipping out on rent. Middle of 1st grade. A random teacher realizes I'm reading library books brought from home in the back and not doing work, not common in a special ed classroom. She called my mom and teacher to a meeting, had me tested as gifted, told my mom that I was pretending to not understand my teachers, and told us that in 2nd grade I was going to be in her room. I was in trouble for the first and last time in school. Looking back, this is such an impactful memory. She was the only teacher who cared about me at all. When they opened my backpack at the meeting, I had it packed with random books. I had encyclopedias from my grandparents' house, stuff from 3 school libraries, magazines. Mrs. Judah changed my ducking life because she cared enough to ask the librarian what language I spoke to help me pick more age-appropriate books. I was reading a high school level novel because the school had just been converted from K-12. It turns out high school books were appropriate for me, not age appropriate but reading level. I love her and will never forget the stash of books she kept for me when they converted the library for K-5. Had the police come to the school because he had reason to believe I was smoking cigarettes and using drugs in 7th grade. No, both of my parents smoked in the house. I didn't even know I smelled like cigarettes until the police told me why they were searching my backpack, desk and locker. My RE teacher tried to keep me behind for no reason. I'm a complete goody two shoes and he gave me my first ever detention for asking my friend about what textbook page we were reading. After coming to class late following an appointment, the guy tried to make me pick bits of paper and rubber bands off the floor as he watched me do it. I walked out with 0 consequences. When I was in 7th grade there was a teacher at my school that was essentially a love child of Santa and an elf. Dude was 5 feet 2, over 300 pounds, and had a beard that would put Jim Lee to shame. My first ever conversation with this man ended with him saying, "Now you go get yourself something to eat." Big man. Shit caught me so off guard. I didn't realize what he had said until after I walked away. Not me. My brother. He had one of those haircuts that was popular in the mid-90s where you have long fringe, maybe 5 feet, but skinhead the rest. He was a skateboarder. Anyway, the woodshop teacher decided that the haircut was an health and safety hazard and swiftly cut his hair in front of the whole class, meanwhile berating him kids today, etc. etc. My brother was 12 and came home from school crying. My father was less than pleased and apparently went up to school and made a right kerfuffle, as he should. My mother was very embarrassed by it all. I'll never forget. Had a high school art teacher who would let me stay in his classroom during lunches. Always gave me half his sandwich and other extra food because he knew I didn't eat much otherwise. Edit. He would also keep a drawer in the classroom stocked with snacks so that I could swing by and grab something between classes if I needed. No. He never did anything questionable. And no, I never fell asleep after eating the sandwiches. He was just a kind person. I can't remember what I did, but in first grade my teacher got mad at me and said, "You wanna act like a baby? Fine, come over here." She made me sit in a corner on the floor and gave me 2 little toys to play with. When I was in 3rd grade, the teacher of my gifted program class, extra class we were pulled from mainstream to do a few hours a week, started berating me over raising my hand too quickly to answer questions, saying I needed to think longer and give others a chance to answer. She went on and on about how I had an attitude. I got upset and she made me stand in front of the class when I started to cry. I know you're crying and I don't care. It was my birthday. It was a class of about 8 students. One guy told me in high school that that day was one of his clearest memories from elementary school. One of my most vivid memories of high school is of an old bitch of an English teacher mocking a fellow student's nervous stammer as she did her presentation in front of the class. When the student started crying, that old bitch mocked her crying, then failed her for not completing the presentation because she was crying. We used to joke that we hoped that old dried up bitch would drop dead in front of the class. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I hope your subsequent birthdays have rocked. Oh boy, grade 3. I said "oh crap" when I got tagged out, rounding second, during a game of soccer baseball, Canadian term for kickball. A little girl covering the base screamed, "Teacher!" Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Negotiation failure, said the C word. So I got put on detention and yelled at for the rest of the day until I finally snapped on my teacher at the end of the day and said, "Listen teacher, I don't get it." All I said was "oh crap" when she caught the ball, and I didn't even know that that was a swear word. The teacher replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said the other C word." I said, "What is the other C word?" Apostrophe. She said, "Ask your mother." At the end of the day I got into the van and told my mom what happened. She broke out laughing her ass off and explained to me when I asked that the word the teacher thought I had said was cunt. I went to school the next day and said to all my friends, "Hey guys, guess what word I just learned?" This teacher was extremely strict, hated by my class, but loved me because I was one of the few who respected her and did well in her class. When school ended, she gave me a crystal bear. Nothing too fancy or expensive, but I felt as if I was glowing leaving that classroom with bear in my hand. I still have it and will treasure it forever. I was anorexic when I was in school. She took me aside after class and told me that if I didn't stop doing what I was doing to myself, I was going to die, that my body was going to start shutting down, my organs would fail, that it would not be beautiful, and I was going to die an awful and painful death. I still catch myself slipping back into that mindset 10 years later sometimes, but I will never forget that. She saved my life. Senior year of high school, I was on the wrestling team and I had cut about 30 pounds that year, from 170 down to 140. I happened to have the same math teacher 3 years in a row, so we really got to know each other. First name basis and all that. She knew how much weight I cut for the season. I told her, and it was obvious just from my face. I wasn't fat before my cut either. I had a six-pack. She had a strict no eating in class policy. That'll be important in a minute. The day after the wrestling season ends, I walk into math class and sit down. She walks over to my desk and puts a whole apple pie right in front of me. She knew it was my favorite, handed me a fork, and said she'll ignore the no eating rule for one day. I finished that whole pie in maybe 30 minutes. Linda, I'll never forget that. You absolutely made my day. I have always loved learning and loved going to school. I was a good kid and never really got into trouble. One year my parents got called in for a parent-teacher conference. One by one, each of my teachers told my parents that I acted out during class, was a distraction, etc. This came as a surprise to my parents as I had never gotten in trouble, and my grades were always good. Finally, the conversation got to my history teacher and my science teacher. They were speechless. My history teacher told my parents that he wished he had a classroom full of students with a passion for learning like me, and that if the other teachers put in as much effort into teaching as I did into learning, then there would not be an issue. My science teacher agreed and apologized for wasting my parents' time. The rest of the school year was interesting. I could tell there was tension between certain groups of my teachers. My history teacher would later become the principal of that school, and I could not think of anyone more deserving of that role. When I was in 5th grade in 1975, my parents were divorcing, and I was living with my abusive father. If I didn't get B+ or better on my report card, I got the belt. Not a little, mind you, a full-on beatdown, and probably denial of meals for a while. The 70s with an abusive parent were a very different time. My father had quite a reputation in the small Pennsylvania town I lived in, McKean, PA. He was known as an incredibly strict person, and our neighbors all hated him. But this was a different time, and that sort of behavior was ignored in public. My 5th grade math teacher, Mr. Cunningham, scared me. He looked a bit like my father, and didn't suffer any nonsense in his classroom at all. I struggled with mathematics, and it just didn't make sense to me. We got our first report card in 5th grade. These were the days where you could carry a card with you for the day, and the teacher would write your grade on the report card. You would then have to take it home and have a parent sign it to acknowledge that they had seen your grades. So far through the day, the grades were good. A's, mostly, and but all good. Math was my last class of the day before I had to catch the bus. When my report card came back to me, I froze in terror. I recall this moment like a photograph. The grade was a D, written in pen, right there on the report card. I knew what was coming. The blood drained out of my face. Mr. Cunningham dismissed the class, and I was frozen in my desk, scared of what he would do, and even more scared of what my father would do. All the other kids had left the classroom, and my world around me was gone. Just me, my books, and the D staring at me telling me that my 10-year-old self was going to suffer badly. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I shook and started crying. Mr. Cunningham looked at me. He took my report card out of my hand and walked up to his desk. He called me up there. I was still terrified, probably shaking, definitely trying to hide my crying and failing. He got out a black pen and changed the D into a B+. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. He knew. He could see the signs. And he knew how terrified I was and why. I had no idea an adult could be so compassionate, and had no idea it was even possible to change something like that. He handed my report card back to me and said two words that have stayed with me to this day. Learn this. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, I know. It's not fair. And I'm sorry. You're a smart kid, and you can get this. Just ask me for help. He knew. It was a simple act of kindness, and it stuck with me to this day. The math grade didn't matter. I'm successful enough in my 50s to not have that come up on my permanent record. But the permanent change of my impression of Mr. Cunningham is still very much with me. If you have power over other people, you have to wield that power with compassion. You have to tailor that power to meet the needs of the individual. That is the lesson I learned that day from Mr. Cunningham. The next terms I got a B+ or better. I assume it's because I worked really hard and Mr. Cunningham helped me out at lunch, or he was kind because he knew. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. This was 45 years ago, and I still remember you. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.